Okay, it's been some time since I did a video. I just happened to see a notification. I don't go on Facebook anymore. I haven't done many videos at all since February. But I seen a video in Full Preterism, a Thing of the Past, by Sergius Bale, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I guess he's in a written debate with Don Preston. But I seen he did a post on Deuteronomy 32 and Isaiah chapter 2, saying Don's wrong on his usage there. Well, I'm going to educate Sergius just a bit. Don probably already gave him a spanking on this, and I don't agree with Don on everything. I'm not a full preterist. I do not believe in covenant eschatology. I believe it's detrimental in a lot of ways. But let's get right to it. First off, with Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy. Even dispensational scholars, Hitchcock and Thomas Ice, even Deut Pentecost, I don't have my library here, it's at my sister's, but Deut Pentecost, all of them would say Deuteronomy 27 through 32 is one section of Israel's last days. And Deuteronomy 32 pronounces cursings. You go to Deuteronomy chapter 30, it's blessings for Israel if they would keep the covenant. God, Yahweh, and Israel had a what's known in the ancient Near East as a suzerain vassal treaty. And so one party is a suzerain party and one is a vassal. That would be Israel. And so this is the covenant, and this is how they made covenants in the ancient Near East. Babylonia, so on and so forth. And this has covenants of cursings and blessings. Now, the question is, does Deuteronomy 32, he says, Don Preston said it's quoted in Revelation 19. Well, no verses are really quoted from the Old Testament in Revelation, but we know commentators all agree. Zechariah plays a big part in Revelation. Ezekiel plays a big part in Revelation. There's allusions. We need to remember how the New Testament uses the Old Testament. There's a couple books on that are very educational, but there's allusions, there's direct citations, there's echoes, and that's what we see. Now, let's see how Deuteronomy 32 is used before we get to Revelation in the New Testament. First, Acts chapter 2. Acts chapter 2 is very interesting. What do we have here? Acts chapter 2, verse 40. Now, here's what Peter says. And with many other words he solemnly testified and kept on exhorting them, saying, Be saved from this perverse generation. So, with many other words, he solemnly testified and kept exhorting them, saying, Be saved from this perverse generation. And then we see them selling their goods in Judea. They didn't sell their goods anywhere else. And then we go to Acts chapter 3. He chastises Israel again. Acts chapter 3. Let's see here. Oh, I'm not going to get right into that. Verse 24, and likewise all the prophets who have spoken from Samuel and his successors onward also announced these days. It is you are the sons of the prophets and of the covenant which God made with Abraham, saying, And to your seed all the families of the earth shall be blessed. For you first God raised up his servant, and sent him to bless you by turning every one of you from your wicked ways. So Acts chapter 2 is very interesting. He alludes to Deuteronomy 32, and he uses it against Israel standing before him in Jerusalem, in the temple, as he's preaching at the feast. Now, where else do we have it? Romans 10 is an interesting chapter, and I did a full exegesis on Romans chapter 10 in another video. It's probably one of my most viewed videos of the past, because it's chock full of Old Testament citations, direct citations and allusions. Now let's look how it's used in Romans 10 with the other passages being quoted. Blessings and cursings. Now Romans 10, Israel has fallen, but there's still hope for her. There's still hope for her. So in Romans chapter 10, verse 13, we have Joel chapter 2, verse 32, which is the restoration to the land and the temple being rebuilt. In Romans 10:15, we have Isaiah 52:7. Isaiah 52 is Zion being restored and the marriage. 10:19, we have Deuteronomy 32, 21. Then 10:20, we have Isaiah chapter 65. But in 10:19, but I say, surely Israel did not know, did they? First Moses said, I will make you jealous by that which is not a nation, but a nation without understanding will I anger you. That's a direct citation of Deuteronomy 32, and he's placing it on Israel of his day. No one would argue that in Romans 9 through 11 that national Israel is being spoken of. National Israel is being spoken of. So Acts chapter 2, Peter and Paul used Deuteronomy 32 for Israel of their day. Hebrews chapter 10. We'll go back to Romans. No, we'll go to Hebrews chapter 10. And what I think Sergius, I don't know, I haven't read the debate. First time I was in the group in months and months and months. I don't know if he understands sections of Scripture, how to break up sections of books of Scripture, but we're going to educate him on that. Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews chapter 10 verse 12, we have a promise. Psalm chapter 10 verse 1, Christ being raised on the seat of David. We have Jeremiah 31, which Jeremiah 30 through 34 is one section in Jeremiah. If you study Jeremiah, one section, Jeremiah 31:33 is quoted in 10:17 of Hebrews, Jeremiah 31:34, 10:27, Isaiah 26. That's the apocalypse of Isaiah, Isaiah 24 through 27. Then finally, 10:30, we have Deuteronomy 32. Vengeance is mine, I will repay, and again, the Lord will judge his people. And we see clearly from probably verse 26 and following, it is a pronouncement of judgment on national Israel and an exhortation for the believers in Judea to hold on to the faith under persecution. So in Hebrews chapter 10, Romans chapter 10, and Acts chapter 2, Deuteronomy 32 is used directly against Israel, national Israel, of that day. So when we get to Revelation 19, contextually, within the New Testament corpus, what are we to believe? That it's something different? That it's speaking of something different? The burden of proof would be on Sergius. Now, I don't have a lot of time here on... We have 4 minutes left. I got to get to Isaiah chapter 2. I have to. Pierce off. The commentators, I have many commentaries on Isaiah. Some break Isaiah 1 through 5. Some have it 1 through 4. Some have it 2 through 5. Some have it 2 through 4. I like it 2 through 4, 2 through 5. It doesn't matter. How is it used in Revelation 6? Well, Revelation 6, it was first pointed out, I forget the scholar's name, the commentator's name, about 50 years ago. It was first pointed out that Revelation 6 is totally dependent upon the Matthean version of the Olivet Discourse, Matthew chapter 24. And so when we have that in mind, that this is the Olivet Discourse, reiterated in Revelation chapter 6, and then we see the sixth seal, the earthquake, the sun became black, Isaiah chapter 13. This is Matthew chapter 24. The stars of the sky fell, Matthew 24. Then verse 15. Then the kings of the earth and the great men and the commanders, the rich and the strong and every slave and free hid themselves in the caves amid the rocks and mountains, that they may fall on us from the presence and the wrath of the Lamb. So this is the Matthean discourse, unless we need to have it demonstrated and proved that John is using Matthew in a different way. And speaking of the fall of Jerusalem, and we have him here clearly alluding to Hosea and Isaiah chapter 2. There's no doubt about that. All scholars agree. So what is the significance of Isaiah chapter 2? Well, Sergius doesn't want to have Isaiah chapter 2 being fulfilled there, because that's a lot of trouble. If we go to Isaiah chapter 2, it's the kingdom, it's Zion restored, it's the nation streaming to Zion. It's all of that. It's all of that. In Luke chapter 23, Jesus alludes, doesn't directly quote in Luke 23, but he says to the women when he's going up to be crucified, "Do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For the time will come when they will say to the rocks, 'Fall on us.'" And that's Isaiah chapter 2. And everyone agrees, all commentators agree, Luke chapter 23, that verse is speaking of AD 70. Jesus applied it to AD 70. John, using the Matthean version of the Olivet Discourse, which is the fall of the temple. And we do believe he's using it different. The burden of the proof is on Sergius. So Sergius, needs an education on Deuteronomy 27 through 34. He needs an education on the section of Isaiah, how it's broken up. On Jeremiah 30 through 34. We need to understand sections of Scripture if we're going to exegete them properly.